Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good following morning. This is AMA number 35, November 19th, 2020. I am very sorry for the technical difficulties. I could say that they were real technical difficulties. I could say that it was me not understanding generally that I should share it with everybody and not only share the Facebook Live with myself. Could go either way, but the truth is that it is completely my fault. Let me just turn off my sound so I don't hear myself twice. Hearing myself once is bad enough. So very, very sorry. I apologize for my horrendous technical inadequacies, but it looks like we are okay now. Good. So there we go. The first time I've 35 is a charm. So the 35th time, it took me 35 times to totally mess it up, but I just wanted to keep everyone in suspense, but there you go. So today my guest is a very good friend of mine, an amazing woman, someone I've gotten to know over the last few years very well. I consider her a very close personal friend, Geneviève Zubrzycki. Very difficult name to pronounce. I spent all morning practicing. Geneviève is a professor of sociology at the University of Michigan. She's written a bunch of really cool books that we're going to talk about, and she is actually going to be joining from Paris, where she is she's on sabbatical for the year, and she's just one of the coolest, most fantastic, brilliant, fun people I know. So, but not yet will we get, before Geneviève, we have to talk a little bit about a few other things, and I'm just trying to figure it out. So I see all the comments. I don't see them yet since my Facebook is a little wonky. Oh, there we go. Benji, because I'm not wearing my glasses. Open more windows. The Elton John glasses. Oh, I wish, if only they were Elton John glasses. Sorry, the glasses. I'm back to the contacts. It's the old regular me that you know and possibly love. So let's get to it before we bring on Geneviève. Let's get to it. What's going on with the JCC? JCC sort of in the same situation that we've been in. Friday is open and the JCC is still closed. Corona is still very we're doing very poorly with Corona. It was down this week. It hit 25,000. It went below 20,000, so it was going in the right direction. And sadly, the number today went up to 24,000. So the Ministry of Health said the coronavirus in Poland has stabilized. I don't see how 24,000 cases a day is stabilized. I guess in some literal sense it might be stabilized, but it doesn't seem very stable. So or very good. So not thrilled about that. Where we are with that. But luckily we are able to function the way that we're functioning, which is Friday being open, the preschool being open, and everything else running virtually. People asked about Pani Zosha. She wasn't doing too well. She had some back problems and hip problems. She was taking some medication for it, and we went to visit her. She is doing okay. She sends her loves and greetings to everybody. So that's it's very kind of everyone. You know, Pani Zosha, in some sense, is really, in some sense, really the heart and soul of our JCC. Speaking to groups over the years, just being this sort of moral figure, leader in not only in our community but in all of Poland and the Jewish community. So it's we're happy that she's doing better, and hopefully the senior club is closed, but we do get a chance to see her. We visit her. We bring we deliver Shabbat packages and other packages to the seniors, Pani Zosha included. So thank you for all your concerns, and maybe we'll bring her back for another episode to say hi, but she's sort of a little bit in reclining position, so not great. What else is going on? The American election, we're still not much to add from last week. We're still in this bizarre holding pattern of a big spoiled baby refusing to acknowledge that he lost, which is no shock, but the surprising aspect is, of course, that people who were considered serious, reasonable people are essentially GOP politicians are standing by him, which is just, I don't know. It'll be, I can't wait to be 110 years old, 60 years from now, so I can read the history books and understand how historians will look back on the Trump presidency and on the Trump enablers. Again, Trump is what he is, but the enablers are really what fascinates me. And that's what we have going, with a small percentage of Republican politicians acknowledging the Trump's loss in the election, which is, this is the emperor's new clothes is a fantastic situation. Everyone's afraid of him and acknowledges him, and behind his back, they all know that he is what he is. But it's just very surprising to put yourself ahead of the country the way that he and that his followers are doing. But that's that. What else is going on? Kasha, for her birthday, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, we got Kasha a car. For years and years, we've lived in the center of the city. We have no car, but Kasha got her driver's license, and we thought it would be nice with the dog to be able to go outside, especially with the Corona situation, not wanting to take taxi so much in public transportation, that we actually got a little car. A little sort of city car, tiny little cute car, and Kasha's very happy driving it around. She's getting much better as a driver. But what's cool is that we're able to park it. For those of you who've been to my place and see where we live like right next to the synagogue on this little street that's almost an alley, very narrow street, but we're allowed to park there. So actually we park, it's the empty street and then just our little car in front of our house. So it's funny. Jeffrey Rolla, tell us about your driver's license. All right, tough guy. Tell us about your driver's license. Jeffrey, tell us about the Lincoln with the thing that you could plug a refrigerator into. Saul, 30% of the population believe the election was stolen. Yeah, 47% of the population think the world is flat. Benji, how many AMAs will I have done by age 110? Well, that's a good question, Benji. 52 times 60, 3,000. So something like 3,100 AMAs plus 35. So we're looking at over, you're looking at 3,000 AMAs. I promise, Benji, if I do 3,000 AMAs, I will bring you back to be a return guest. Been very, very few return guests. So far, a little bit of AMA trivia. I think at episode 35, we can have some trivia. Who was on more than one AMA? Anybody? Benji, Jeffrey, and Saul, my top 3 viewers. Do any of you know? I had one guest that was a 2-parter so far. Oh, nobody knows. Okay. Very soon we're going to get to Geneviève. Nobody has nobody guessed. Okay. So far, but I do want to say something. Every year, almost every year, we do a calendar. And this year we do a JCC calendar. We like to focus on our members to show the Jewish community a little bit, people that we can then give to people. They visit us, they meet some of these people. It's very nice for people to learn about the community. So here is our, hold it up to so you see it well. This is our 2021 Krakow calendar available in November. This is very early for us. We usually get it done like January 2nd or something, right when the calendar is a little less exciting. But this is our calendar, and we did this year focused on our members and places they love in Krakow. So this is Maria on the cover, who's a student in our Hillel, and her favorite place is the bridge, this Klapka Bernatka bridge, Kłatka Bernatka. So you see that where she took a photo of her, and there's photos of all different members standing in their favorite places. Hani Malgosha, who runs our senior club, in front of a statue she likes in the park, in the Plante. So it's a very nice calendar. You can write to us and we'll send you one. Very, very cheap. Let us know if you like it. It's a nice way to stay in touch with our community all through the year. Chuck Fishman gets it. Paley. Michael Paley was the 2-time guest. Very good. Benji Lovett, Don Mattingly. I'm going to very quickly tell a Don Mattingly story. My dad once through work had very, very good seats at Yankee Stadium. For all of you who don't know, which is probably everyone except me and Benji and Jeffrey Rolat, Don Mattingly was a longtime first baseman on the New York Yankees, a great player in the 80s, 90s. One day, my dad, we were at a baseball game on Father's Day and had really good seats on the Yankee dugout. And Mattingly was walking back to the dugout and he said, my dad yelled, "Hey, Mattingly, it's Father's Day. How about a ball?" And Don Mattingly rolled the ball across to my dad on Father's Day, which was very, very cool. So that's my Father's Day story. My dad is not watching live, but I think he'll watch it later. So without any further ado, I will bring on our guest, the wonderful and talented Geneviève Zubrzycki. She is a comparative historical and cultural sociologist, a professor at the University of Michigan. She's the director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia at the University of Michigan, the Center for European Studies at the University of Michigan, the Copernicus Program in Polish Studies at the University of Michigan, the Department of GTBZ Relations at the University of Michigan, and also a visiting professor at the, French pronunciation, École de Haute Études en Sciences Sociales, Paris, editor of Comparative Studies in Sociology and Society and History, quarterly peer-reviewed academic journal published quarterly by the Cambridge University Press. She has a degree from McGill and from University of Chicago and has written lots of books and is very, very fancy and smart and all of that stuff. And yeah. How are you, Geneviève, with the longest bio ever?
Yeah, well, I mean, with your introduction, I'm doing great.
Oh my God! Usually I just say, "Oh, here's some cool friend of mine," but with you, you got the whole deal.
Well, the deal I deserve, I guess, right?
I was gonna almost mention that you won the what is it? The Croix de Guerre and a few other they used to give. In
no, but I have JCC honorary membership. That's even more important. Yeah. Okay. So I do have my member card.
Very good. And I'm sure do you use it? In Paris and many places, I think you can get a discount with that. So I hope you're carrying it around with you.
That's my VIP card when I went to. Yes, exactly.
And how is you're joining us, of course, today from Paris? You're on sabbatical. And how's that going, your Corona sabbatical?
Blissful, I mean, so with all the stuff I usually do when I'm in Ann Arbor, now I can actually focus on my work and write. And, Paris is Paris. So even though the cafes and the restaurants are closed right now, I can still go to all the bakeries, charcuterie and poissonnerie and chocolaterie also that are open, and it still feels like Paris. So, I'm very happy, productive, and enjoying life. And we live like just less than 2 blocks from the Luxembourg Gardens. So every day I go.
Which arrondissement would that be?
The 6th.
The 6th.
The 6th.
So, I think that I had a very good friend who lived from Israel, who was actually Moroccan, and she studied in Paris, and she lived in Place Saint-Germain-du-Pré.
Oh yeah, so
I think also
next door.
And it was right above, and it was actually, I didn't realize, because what did I know, that she lived right above Café right, the famous Café du Magot, was that?
Yeah.
Right above and across from the church. And this is where, so my experience, I've been to Paris other times, but like in a hotel or anything, my only experience of at all living in Paris, and I don't know, I was there a few weeks, I guess, visiting her, but was staying there. So
she was a good friend.
She was a good friend. That was a good friend. My very snobby Paris, which
yeah, well, that sounds like she had an Emily in Paris experience. Yeah,
very much similar. But Geneviève, enough about Paris. Let's talk about something even more fascinating. Geneviève, your name, Geneviève Zubrzycki. I'm sensing a sort of duality of the name. I'm getting a bit of a French vibe from the Geneviève, and then the Zubr, whatever that second thing is, which my Polish sense can pronounce as Zubrzycki. God knows how you pronounce it in Michigan and your students pronounce it. Tell me about your background, Geneviève.
Well, Geneviève is my first name and because of my native language. It's French. I'm from Quebec. Zubrzycki or Zubrzycki, like we say in my family, is from my father's side. So my paternal grandparents were Polish. And my father was born in 1940, August 1940 in France. So my grandfather was a Polish officer and he was stationed in France. My grandmother was with Polish families of officers that were, what do you say? Evacuated. And he was born in southern France in 1940. And after 3 or 4 years before the end of the war, they left through Portugal and came to Canada. So My father married a nice French Canadian woman, and here I am with this French first name and Polish last name. My
How do your
father
students, I'm sorry, how do your students, sorry to interrupt, Geneviève, how do your students pronounce your name? When somebody walks in on the first day, I don't assume any freshmen get to learn with you, but I'm sure only when the PhD, doctoral
they don't
students.
say my name. They say hello.
Does anybody try it?
They say, the common thing is Zubrzycki, which is terrible. That's about the worst thing with a CK, the Zubrzycki. The French Canadian and the French have a much easier way of saying it, which is closer to the original, Zubrzycki. So when I'm here, when I'm in Quebec, there's no problem. They don't stumble over the RZ. They just forget the Z and go Zubrzycki. Otherwise, some people call me Dr. Z.
Dr. Z, I didn't know that. Wait, I'm gonna have to.
Which is not too appropriate for students to call.
How casual and informal you are with your students, Geneviève. Dr. Z.
I'm not, but undergraduate students.
I wouldn't think you are.
Sometimes we get emails, not just me, like other people, like, yo, Professor Z, something. Not great, but no. Then I write it on the board how it should be pronounced, and once you know, but the Americanized French version, Zubrzycki.
Zubrzycki, yeah, I would think it would be Geneviève Zubrzycki or Zubrzycki.
Yeah, that's awful.
Is a butchering of the wonderful, complex amalgam of nationalities known as Geneviève Zubrzycki.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think what's interesting with Polish names, not to go on too deep a dive, but when you meet a woman with a name like yours, then you can clearly tell that your father or you have this Polish background, but that you weren't actually born or didn't grow up, probably is the safest way to put it, in Poland, because of course in Poland you would be Zubrzycka.
Yes.
As we take
actually the first time I came to Poland in 1989, I was 19. And I remember when they got my passport, it was before the beginning of the end. So it was June 1989, and they were looking at my passport and looking at me and looking at passport and not able to understand that I had a masculine last name and I was visibly a woman in front of them. So now people are getting used to different kind of configurations of names and genders. Back then, less so. So had funny stories about that. But
you're saying that these days it could be that somebody would meet you and then not think that the name was the issue, just assume that was the proper, that you were actually.
But now it's interesting too that Polish people now, some Poles insist on calling me Zubrzycki, even we're speaking Polish, because they know that's my formal name. And so I'm going to a hotel and they say, oh, Pani Zubrzycki, which sounds very weird also. I said, well, you can say Zubrzycka.
It's very interesting when you have these different fundamental aspects that are different in a language, in terms of gender or without gender and formal and not. When you're speaking to somebody in English, hey, what's up, blah, blah, blah. And then you switch to Polish and you're in the formal with that person. And then it's like you have this distance.
Yeah.
Very interesting to have a multi-linguistic relationship with people with the same people, because when you switch languages, you sort of switch a little bit.
So how was it for you when you learned Polish from English? I don't know, in Hebrew, do they have formal and informal? Because
No, Hebrew would be the last language ever to have anything formal, because Israel and the whole culture itself is so informal. You're talking about something only recently did the members of the Knesset, in the last 20 years actually start wearing ties. You look at photos from the 50s and 60s and it's like open shirt.
Because it was the 50s and the 60s, yeah.
So Israel's a very informal, not only is it an informal culture, but it's shockingly, I would say even more than that, it's almost as if the presupposition of the relationship between people is different. So it's almost like you're all long lost cousins, which is why if you're getting off the bus and the bus driver asks where you're going and you say you're going somewhere, he'll be like, no, can't get off here. And you'll say, no, I'd rather, they're like, no. And they'll actually like force you to get off. It's like in some ways what some people find pushy and rude, but which is just sort of this overly connected or overly or lack of distance in the way that you have not with strangers. It's almost like no one is a stranger, is an absolute stranger in Israel.
Yeah.
But I guess this
Big
is
family. Yeah.
Jewish history and
Yeah.
the unique nature of a modern country forged the way it was forged. But I want to talk. So your third book, you have, I'm sure you've written thousands of papers and monographs and everything else, as one does, being a professor at the University of Michigan. But I want to really talk a little bit today with you about your three books, and the third one hasn't come out, just because, I purposely kind of focused a little on the French aspect of French Canadian, and then the Polish, because your three works, your three books really are sort of connected to your background in that sense. So I wanted to maybe ask you how much, before, and we'll talk about each one, but is how much of your career and your profession and the fact that you're a professor and studying and involved in what you're involved in, how much of that is a product of your background? Or is it a coincidence?
No, there's no question. I mean, there's no question that it's related. I mean, even the first time I set foot in Poland was, as I mentioned, it was June 1989. And it was, I remember my great aunt taking me to the church in Warsaw where Popiełuszko is buried on June 4th, just during the vote. And I did not speak a word of Polish, but I could hear Solidarność, so that's, and I was seeing like all these priests and nuns and, all the religious iconography. And I was really shocked by this because the Quebec I grew up in was utterly secular, and I even like militantly anti-religious. So arriving in Poland, I was really struck by what, the churches being full, etc., etc. And that experience, then I came back to Poland to learn Polish properly. I studied, I did my MA then on the Catholic Church in Poland. And then my PhD on anti-Semitism and the silences around the Holocaust in Poland. And that led to my book, The Crosses of Auschwitz, Nationalism and Religion.
So I'm sorry, because I didn't know your PhD thesis led to the
crosses. Connected. Yeah. Because I studied the controversy of the crosses just outside Auschwitz. Right. Because I was there the summer of the Carmelite Convent controversy. And then during the 1990s, I came back very often and lived for almost 3 years in Poland. And so I was there during this opening of collective memory around the Holocaust in Poland. And, when Jan Gross published Neighbors, I was in Poland then when you could hear Jedwabne everywhere. I mean, I did not know what Jedwabne was. I said, what are they talking about, right? So the first book, my initial curiosity about, what are you looking at? Oh, that's the Polish version. See, so that was super special for me. You have the English version, you have the Polish translation, yes. So that it was translated in Polish was a big deal for me.
For me as well. For me as well.
Yes, well, thank you. Getting to that issue, I got to it from the perspective of my study of the role of the Catholic Church in Poland. And because Quebec had gone through a revolution getting rid of the Catholic Church in the 1960s, from there I got to this issue of anti-Semitism and the memory or non-memory of the Holocaust. So for sure, being from Quebec and arriving in Poland, it was very, very religious, was a shock of some kind. And then discovering the Jewish past and all the silences and the taboos around the Holocaust was also something that was very, as a North American, very surprising, and then led me to study these issues.
What about growing up? Because with a background of a father from, Polish father, you didn't speak Polish at home, I understand, but you were genetically predisposed to learning Polish, which I think if you have Polish roots, I think it helps somehow.
Yeah, well, no, because my parents unfortunately divorced when I was 3, so I didn't have much contact with my dad, yes, but with my grandparents, very little. I come from a secular family. So my mother and all my family are part of those who in the 60s decided, said, enough with the church. So my mom in the 60s, after having two, by 20, she had two kids, wanted to go on the pill, and the priest refused to I don't know, forgive her or something. And then she said, that's enough. Like many women, like what we're seeing right now in Poland, left the church. And it was that the church since then was done. So I didn't grow up in a religious family at all.
Did you grow up? What about in terms of Jewish issues? Did you have notion? You said that you came, and then we'll talk in a second about the first book, about Crosses of Auschwitz. But were you coming to that from any particular background? Were you coming to it from the idea of, oh yeah, I heard stories about Poland was anti-Semitic before the war, the Holocaust, and the Poles this, or I heard stories of Polish bravery and the saving the Jews. Do you feel you were coming at it from like a neutral point of view, or any particular point of view?
I didn't have, I think that in the English-speaking world, well, in France too, but in Quebec, there was not much talk about that. I mean, I knew about the Holocaust, from movies and from history books, but not from family or talking about this. I mean, I knew some of it because my father and my grandfather were very sensitive to issues of anti-Semitism. So that was like, if anyone would say anything or suggested some kind of anti-Semitic thing, my father would really, my grandfather too. But no, I was not coming up either with preconceived notions about anti-Semitism of Poles or about Jewish stereotypes or anything. I mean, I was raised in Quebec City. I mean, everyone is Francophone, there's few immigrants. I mean, for me, a big shock was moving to Montreal and realizing that, oh, wow, some people don't speak French.
And getting bagels.
And what? And yeah, the best.
The best bagels.
They are the best.
I'm a New Yorker, and I acknowledge. Good.
Yeah,
Saint Viator, the best bagels.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Uh-huh.
So no, I didn't have.
Don't pay attention to that.
Huh? What'd you say?
People in New York should ignore that comment. I'll get in trouble when I go to New York.
No, they know the truth. They might not be able to admit it.
Bagels are better. I'm the New Yorker to the core. I'll say New York is the center of the earth, but Montreal bagels are better than New York bagels.
Okay, great. I'm sure they're better than Paris bagels. That's for sure.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So what was your question?
Well, my next question, I don't remember. I have no idea. My question, I'm living in the present. The only thing I remember is bagels. But I wanted to ask you, so maybe, because I don't know that everybody is instantly familiar with the Carmelite convent, the controversy, so maybe a little bit about the controversy and then what your book was about and what you found.
Well, in 1989, there was earlier, let's back up a little bit. In the late 1980s, Carmelite nuns set up a convent just outside the terrain of the current Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, in a building that was used to store actually the deadly gas by the Nazis, right? So they were not inside the former camp, but they were immediately outside, and then they were praying for victims of the camp. So of course, this created a big, controversy with Jews around the world who thought it was very problematic that nuns would be praying for Jewish victims, etc. So there was negotiations to have the convent be removed, relocated. The nuns refused to move, and in 1989, one rabbi from New York came and protested just outside of that. Yes. Just protested, and this was just when Poland was regaining independence, so there was fury also in Poland saying, well, those people will not come and tell us how we're supposed to manage the site. And things escalated. Finally, the nuns were relocated, but just before then there's a large cross that was in the middle of the night, erected just by the former convent. to further sacralize the site. And that was done in the middle of the night so that no one would notice. And actually few people noticed, and people were lucky that the nuns left and that cross was left alone for a while until rumors that the cross would be removed started to circulate. And then some people, this one man from Katowice, Kazimierz Fitoń, invited Poles to come and protect the so-called papal cross, and invited people to start coming, putting more crosses there. And within a few months that summer, there were 100-something crosses there. So the book is about that. The book is about that event, but I'm using that event to understand the Polish non-memory of the Holocaust, the issue of how they think of Oświęcim or Auschwitz, but they referred it until then very much so as Oświęcim, as their own site of martyrdom, and how to reconcile different memories of the war, why it's so difficult in Poland, and especially after 50 years of communism that had like its different spin on the issue, and all theological issues also. Can you have religious symbols or not, etc. So I was using this as a window into all sorts of broader issues that Poland was facing at the time and continue to face, actually, about memory of the Holocaust, but also about what they want Poland to be, and the different factions within Polish society and the political field about, whether Poland is a Catholic nation and should ban abortion, have crosses, have religious instruction, mandatory in schools, etc., or be a modern European secular society that also fesses up to, its past, the dark spots and, the dark corners of history, which, in all fairness, they had started to do, especially with the publication of Neighbors and a host of other very brave books by Polish authors who, especially recently, in spite of, legal, laws that and legal recourses that the state has, continue to publish on these very difficult issues.
Yeah, no, I think that, and many of the issues that you're talking about now or we're talking about in the book are still, of course, playing themselves out as you mentioned, and really interesting. I sort of getting into these relations between the messy relationship and the deeply complicated relationship between Poles and Jews, and why the healing process, which is sometimes for us, those of us who are deeply involved, you and I and others here, we understand it very clearly. But I think when you sort of to talk to people about this idea of why Polish-Jewish relations in many ways are so much more complicated than German-Jewish relations. In other words, it's a much cleaner equation in German-Jewish relations. Like, right. Germany says, we're sorry, we apologize, we offer you X, we support Israel X, we do this, and Jews can accept or not accept, and then kind of move on. And there's a feeling like Germany has rehabilitated itself in the Jewish mind. The secondary part of that from a perspective is, are Holocaust fatigue in Germany, and are they fed up with it? Kind of leaving that aside, which is where we're moving toward now, or where we are now. But with the Polish-Jewish question, it's so complicated. Just this idea of victimhood and competing victimhood.
Exactly.
And Poles suffered, and we Jews need to. We want Poles to understand, to look at our suffering as unique, but we don't necessarily want to understand their suffering. And as their suffering is putting crosses in Auschwitz or next to Auschwitz, whether it's inside or outside, and what this historically was, does that diminish our suffering? And for us, this idea of the Holocaust is not just another event, but a unique world event that we don't, it's so much more difficult in that sense. And we're still, I feel like I'm in my day-to-day job dealing with Poles, dealing with visitors here. I'm dealing with these same issues every single day. Who essentially saying to me for years that the JCC has been open is, Germany apologized. What about Poland? And I say, it's great that Germany apologized, but Germany has something else to apologize for than Poland. We can discuss what Poland may or may not have to apologize for, but Germany is in its own category.
Right. Yes. You're right. Yeah, I mean, but I think that in Poland right now, there's this additional layer, which is that all of these issues are incredibly politicized, right? So, I mean, all that stuff is always political.
Yeah.
But now you have, you know, the party in power is really trying to capitalize on this, you know, rejecting all the work that's been done since the early 2000s, you know, and calling that the politics of shame, and that we need to stand up and actually revert back to previous mythologies about Polish victimhood and purity. So I think it makes it very difficult. But I mean, all of that dialogue that occurred in the 2000s and continue in certain circles, it's very difficult for people to get that, to actually acknowledge that.
I think a lot of the issues with Poland as a country have to do with issues, to me, that are somehow reminiscent of questions of masculinity. I feel like the Polish view of itself is almost like a country that's been emasculated, maybe because of the history of being conquered and partitions for 123 years, and this sort of idea of, you know, and the peculiar or particular nature of Polish history, that Poland, with its regained independence, has to, you know, sort of overcompensate for that a little bit. And anytime Germany offers help with the vaccine and we don't need German, you know, we're Polish, and, you know, relax. I think that a country that was more self-confident wouldn't have to react that way to threats, sometimes real. Putin, I would say at this point, is probably a threat to any neighboring countries, and we do share a border, so fair enough, but also threats somewhat imagined. I don't, Germany,
Well,
all the sins
I
of
mean,
Germany, I'm not sure of
that,
Germany being a threat to Poland at this point today, and railing against the EU, but it's almost like trying to, in some way, being against everybody and showing how strong and we don't need anybody, and thumbing their nose at the EU. It's almost like this attempt to capture some type of of maybe masculinity that's been lost, as I see it.
well, I mean, what you're describing is also like what's going on, or what was going on, I don't know, still in the US, right? This kind of hyper masculinity of Trump and sexism and all of that stuff, and you could say the emasculated working classes that feel like basically they don't have that much, and you know, when we talk about making America great again, what does that mean? It's going back to this kind of American dream of owning a house and having still like one breadwinner in the family, right? It's going back to a model where actually going to Detroit and working in the factory was enough to give a decent living to your wife and your children.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some of that too. But what you're describing about Poland is also, it tends to be typical of what's called also so-called small nations, of nation that whose existence is a little bit uncertain and you know, like Germany never had to fear for their existence, the US either. But Poland, you know, Israel, Quebec, small.
The Czech Republic, for example, if you know, even literature or anything, isn't this, everything in Poland has to be so grandiose, and Poland sees itself in this way. There are countries that are small that have been wiped off the map as well, that don't necessarily have this worldview.
Yeah, but look at Hungary. Hungary has that, right? That they feel they've been amputated by Transylvania, and you know, I mean, there's some of that. That's what Milan Kundera talks about small nations and Central Europe. I mean, there might be something to that.
The Poles just feel the Hungarians are just naturally a bit fascist. You know, it's like, oh, that's just the Hungarian way.
Yeah, everyone is a little bit fascist, or everyone is a little bit more or less whatever, right? It's like Poles, when they talk about Ukrainians or Belarusian, they're more authoritarian and they're more primitive. I mean, so yes, I mean, Poles have this sense of, you know, they were cheated by history, and they might have a chip on their shoulder.
It's very hard. Competing victimhood is something very difficult, no matter what the scale is and no matter what the context is. And this is what it comes down to with Polish-Jewish relations. This competing victimhood is such a delicate balance of being able to be respectful of someone else's suffering while still wanting to highlight your own.
So speaking of Polish-Jewish relations, I mean, how do you feel about those relations just in the last couple of years? I mean, do you feel like
Professor Zubrzycki.
No, I'm inverting the tables. I'm interviewing you.
Bring it on. How do I?
I want to know, you know, since Law and Justice has really turned like way to the right. I mean, have you felt a big difference? And, you know, I mean, when I've been talking with you about my next project, the project I'm finishing now, I'm writing now, for 10 years.
My hagiography.
Your hagiography, right? So I'm finishing, I've got one chapter left, and then I'm sending it to publishers.
You don't need somebody to make sure that it's all kosher before you send that to any publishers, Geneviève?
I don't know. Should I send it to you or not? We'll see. You and I will talk about that.
You bring that offline?
Yeah. No, but my question is that 10 years ago, you were very optimistic. You know, you were things are going in the right direction. Things are, you know, people are interested. Non-Jews are interested in who we are and what we do. Has it changed?
The circumstances may have changed in some sense, the context, as you allude to, of course. But what's happening in Poland and in Jewish Poland is a movement, Jews and non-Jews together, that's larger than who might be in power right now. So is it more difficult when peace is in power for us? It is, but not necessarily for reasons of anti-Semitism and these issues. It's more about, I think that there are certain Jewish values, which maybe not all Jews hold, but which I see as Jewish values, which our institution goes by: inclusiveness, fairness, openness, and the equality between sexes and things like this, which this government is not helpful with, let's say, openness to the stranger and to the other and things. So it's made it more difficult in that sense, because that's part of what we stand for, and we've become more political in the sense of
Right.
Rainbow flag in my window and a lightning bolt in my other window, and that's the reality that we're in. In terms of a Jewish sense, I mean, I don't feel, people ask me about this government, and I say I don't feel that this government's anti-Semitic. I feel this government is anti-democratic to some sense, right. And that's the answer I would give about Trump, who he's dog whistling to and who he doesn't mind getting in bed with. I don't think he necessarily has those things, but at the end of the day, it might not really matter so much. So I think that it's too early. Like, there's the famous quote about history. They ask somebody, asked like Churchill, it's about the French Revolution. He's like, it's too early to tell, or something like a little bit. Yeah, I think that you have a party like this in power, and how long they stay in power, and what will it take? How long until we're able to fully see the results of that? But, I mean, of course, I think for me, there was one period here. There was a 1-year period, which is not right now, but in between the time that they passed the IPN law and the time that they took it off the books, more or less, was the one time that it was starting to question whether Jews in Poland have a future if things continue going in this way, because young people were like, I just don't want to live here. And I think now young people are completely fed up, and it's not, there's all the women's march and women's strike, but it's not only women. It's people fed up, led by women, which is wonderful, and inspired by women, which is important here. But this idea that they're not fed up and want to leave, I think they're fed up and want to fight, which is a very, very different idea. That, wait a minute, this country is ours and we want to fight for it. And maybe we saw the previous generation fight in the way that you witnessed in 1989 at the very end of that, and they want to do it differently. And maybe the church, instead of the difference here in terms of a larger macro sense, is that the church is on the other side of it. The church is firmly aligned with the government, whereas the point when you came and you saw that everyone was so religious, 1989, everyone was so religious because the one way you could express your anti-government act was to go to a church. So people couldn't care less about church, were as pro-church as can be. So now you have the church really on the other side of things, as they're firmly aligned with peace. But yeah, no, the answer to your question, Professor Zubrzycki, is I'm still very, very optimistic. And I might even be more optimistic, because the idea that we can continue doing what we're doing in a more difficult environment maybe says more about the actual reality of the situation than it does say, oh, everything's easy and touchy-feely, then of course we're able to thrive. If we're able to thrive, an organism that can thrive in a difficult environment is a stronger organism.
Well put. That sounds I don't know, I'm not sure I like the organism metaphor, but
A movement, an institution, anything.
yeah. No, you're right. Yeah.
So maybe let's just very, very quickly, because I did say we're going to talk about your 3 books and I got a late start. So I want to make sure we usually try to keep on time, but it's just so fascinating, Geneviève, that we have to continue. You talk a little bit about your second book as we get to the Quebecois, the Quebec aspect of things, Beheading the Saint. So talk maybe just a little bit about that, because I want to leave a few minutes for talk about your current project of the Jonathan Ornstein.
Well, I mean, the Beheading the Saint is actually a book about the 1960s when people decided to get rid of Catholicism in Quebec. So it's being translated. It's published in Polish now. I think it should be in the bookstores if there are some open in a couple weeks, actually, in Poland. Yeah. So it's appearing in Polish, and I wrote a special preface in Polish about Poland and Quebec like this, because basically it's about the quiet revolution in Quebec. How within 10 years, people who, 90% of people used to go to church every week, and within 10 years, the church was done. And so I analyzed that process, and what's going on in Poland now is very closely reminiscent of what happened in Quebec in the 1960s. And then I'm analyzing today, what does that mean for Quebec that thinks that they overcame Catholicism, that they think that they're, post-Catholic society, post-secular, that they're utterly secular, when actually, once they get immigrants that are from other religions, they remain more Catholic than they think they are. So I analyze recent debates about, the hijab, for example, or the Sikh turban, or other religious, the kippah. That's also, a big issue in Quebec. So now you're not supposed to wear any religious garb in your exercise of professional functions, state functions. So I'm analyzing all of this, how the Catholic past of Quebec, even though it's a secular society now, informs how it sees other people's religion and religion at large.
And did you perhaps write the book a little too early, seeing what's going on today in Poland, and how much of a blueprint is it what's happening in Poland? And do you see Poland conceivably becoming secular in the way that Quebec has? And will you write something, maybe not another book about it, but will you write something sort of connecting the two at some point? Is that something on your radar?
Well, you see, in the preface of the translation of Beheading the Saint, that's what I do.
Okay.
That's what I do. And I say that Poland is arriving to that. And I mention the women's strike, from a few years ago, and women leaving the church, and that they will be the leader of that revolution. And that's what's happening. I will surely write an article on that issue, because this is when I first came to Poland and for my PG dissertation, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to see if the church in Poland if what happened in Quebec was about to happen in Poland. And then I stumbled upon this issue of religious symbols around Auschwitz. And I resisted that topic for a while, because, that's a tough topic. And then in the end, I embraced it. So I wrote my dissertation not totally on the Catholic Church in Poland and whether there was a secularization of society happening. But now, obviously that's a topic to look into, because it's happening. But it's tough to do like a study of things that are happening.
Real-time study. Yeah, no, the difference, the idea of journalism versus history.
Even like if you want to move on to the third book, right? My book on the Jewish revival.
I do.
It's 10 years of research. And at one point, and why does it take so long for academics to write books? It's not that we're lazy, it's because we're teaching at the same time, and then we're researching, and then we're taking care of grad students. So basically we write
you only have 4 months off during the summer. It's difficult.
Well, yeah, and then during those 4 months, I'm in Poland collecting data.
Hanging out.
But the writing actually takes a long time for that. So at one point I was like very depressed, thinking, oh my God, the book will be finished and the topic will be over, and it's not.
Oh no, don't worry about that, Geneviève. If for no other reason, I would keep the topic going just to have the book be relevant. Tell us about the book.
Well, the book is, it's got several parts, but so one is more about this issue of memory, the non-memory of the Holocaust and how people are recovering that memory and all of the bumps in the road for that. So 3 chapters about that. And then I have one that's about the Jewish revival per se. So looking at the JCC, looking at different, the interviews that I did with people who recovered their Jewish identity, or when I went on that birthright trip with young Polish Jews recovering some kind of Jewish identity on the ground in Israel. So I was very, very lucky, privileged to join a trip like this. So that what I want to do, talking about the Jewish revival, is go beyond the headlines of what we read in, especially North America, about the Jewish revival.
You mean all my propaganda?
No, you're doing a good. You're going beyond. So basically, I'm going a little bit beyond your beyond. I don't know.
How beyond?
I want to show what a Jewish revival that's occurring for non-Jewish Poles, right? What's going on for them and what's going on within Jewish communities, and how these two processes intersect also, and how they feed off each other.
Affect one
That's
another.
what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's work to be done about that. There are some things, but there hasn't been that much from a scholarly point of view. Or from any point of view, really, in terms of really going into an in-depth. There have been hundreds of articles, but not really that much done in an in-depth way about this whole phenomenon, whether looking at it from the point of the Jews, young people who find out they're Jewish, or these, as you're very interested in, the Poles who are fueling this Jewish revival and what their motivation is or something. So maybe
Exactly.
what if you had to just explain to people, because one of the things that's most fascinating, and I answer this question 30 times a week, these young people, 70 volunteers at the JCC and volunteers at the Jewish Culture Festival and running museums, and people getting a master's degree in Jewish studies when there are really not many jobs for it. Maybe quickly, what is the main motivation for these people, for these young non-Jewish Poles? And
I'll answer this, but I want to say that actually interviewing the volunteers at the JCC and volunteers at other institutions was, for me, like the most important part, because this is where you can access their motivations, but also their life stories, where they come from, right? And how they got to that point. I mean, what I found, and in interviews I was doing, was always letting them speak. So I'm not leading much. I'm asking them, tell me what you do here and how you got here and what it means to them. And what they all had in common was, toward the end of the interview, when we're talking about the kind of Poland they want to live in. And then I asked them, where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years? And it's not the Poland they live in. They want to live in an open, as secular country, right? And that basically some of them are politically active. Most were not, actually, in what they're doing in volunteering in Jewish institutions and understanding the Jewish past, and understanding also, dealing with the violent past of Polish-Jewish relationships. For them, it's a way to basically construct a different Poland and to redefine Polish national identity away from this kind of eternal Catholic identity, and say, okay, we can be basically secular and European. So it's part of a political project, even though it might not be related to politics or party politics. That's what they all had in common. And some were religious, some were Catholic, some were Protestant, some were Jewish. I mean, but that's what they have in common. So it's a different vision of Poland.
I think also the post-communist view of Judaism is something that it was that Judaism is so secretive and so closed and such a big mystery, that the idea that these people can actually be a part of that and be accepted and work and be in an institution and have the rabbi say, yo, what's up, and play basketball with the rabbi, in this sort of world that for them, that Judaism is, one, it's mysterious, and also they see everything through this Catholic prism. So the idea,
exactly.
Judaism in many ways, although it's mysterious, when you really get involved and see it, it's very accessible. A synagogue can be any room, and a rabbi is a guy that doesn't have to lead everything. He's not your intermediary to God. So I think that aspect of this sort of Judaism is a much flatter religion than Catholicism is. And in some ways it plays to people, especially young people's search for something that's less hierarchical, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. But also I think that, like the JCC in Krakow and in Warsaw, but also the festivals, right? The festivals have not always the best reputation, because they say, oh, it's all those poles and dancing and singing and but it's also a place where Polish Jews who don't have much contact with Jewish culture actually get a first glimpse of, and it's a welcoming one. And the JCC is a welcoming institution, and it's not knocking on the door of the synagogue and the rabbi, which can be intimidating for someone who knows nothing about Judaism, right? So these institutions provide this kind of intermediate space where people can recover their own Jewish identity. So I think it's very, very important that, the JCC is there to be like a very open, regardless of your origins, to come and see who we are, and we'll go from there. So I think it's good for non-Jews, and obviously for Jews or people in between who are just kind of figuring things out.
On the fence.
Well, not on this fence, in between. They're, they want to become something else perhaps, but they don't know what that else is.
It's important for us that anybody who wants to find a place here can find a place in some capacity. And I think that what's been interesting to me finding out is I think that there aren't that many institutions like that in Poland. Forgetting about the Jewish aspect, that we're a Jewish community center and what we're focused on, I think that there's a certain openness here that is, that we've come up with. And I can't say that it was planned from day one, but that this formula is a sort of an interesting one for people, that they kind of feel part of this.
It's a winning formula.
Well, let's hope
the JTB formula.
Well, GTBZ. Let's hope that we're open soon. This Corona thing is getting a little old, especially you being there in Paris. Krakow Calendar, not visiting you. It's
as soon as Poland are the borders open?
I don't know, but it's not I don't know.
A good time.
I mean, I don't know for whom and what. It's if you're a citizen or not. I don't know exactly what the rules are within the EU. I guess you can go, but it's not a very easy. It's not the best time to visit. Let's put it that way.
I'll come in April.
Always welcome.
And you and Kasha are invited. We have a big apartment, so you can come anytime.
I see. I have a few final questions as we finish up. Are you Team Latka, Team Hamantash, or Team Putin?
Oh, I'm Team Latka, that's for sure.
Yes, excellent. And Geneviève, very important question. Your 3 favorite films?
Oh boy, I don't know. You should have asked me that before. That's what you're asking. Oh, yes, Godfather 1.
Yeah.
Godfather 2 and Godfather 3.
No, not Godfather 3. It's not.
Okay, sorry.
Worthy. What do you
Rocky
mean?
3 then.
You're just telling me what I want to hear. What are your 3 favorite films? Serious question.
I don't think about this. Like, I've got so many. Oh, Vertigo. I was in love with Vertigo.
Okay.
I was a big Hitchcock fan when I was a teenager. Yeah. Oh, the Kieślowski movies I love.
Red, White, and Blue.
Less those than the Decalogue.
Decalogue. Ooh, some light watching.
No, I love the Decalogue. Did you see the Jewish story in that one? That's a very good one. It's a very interesting one.
Maybe
Yeah.
Landsman, maybe as a light third, maybe Landsman's Shoah as your third.
Oh, yeah, right. No. Third one. No. I'll let you know for next time.
You can email that to me along with the galleys from your from the book.
Okay, good. Deal.
Geneviève, such a pleasure. I miss you.
I miss you too. I miss the JCC in Krakow and Kasia. May she buy more coats in New York. And see you guys soon. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for this. Be well. Thank
Be
you.
well.
Everybody.
Bye.
Stay safe.